Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of the Rewatch podcast presented by the Terrible Video Gamers Club. I'm your host for the evening, Tyler Schatz, Warden of the North. I'm joined here this evening by a couple of friends as we recount our time watching the first 4 episodes of Season 1 of Game of Thrones. Going to start here with JC. Introduce yourself, sir.
Hello, I'm Josh. Just watched Game of Thrones for a season and a half, and now giving it a rewatch here, and hopefully stick with it a little bit longer.
Awesome. Nick, up to you, sir.
Hello, Nick Castillo here, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. I've got some Oban Night's Watch whiskey from the Game of Thrones collection from Diago. Ready to enjoy the evening.
All right, and joining us for the first time here on this podcast here, Mr. Gary Delaney. Gary, want to give yourself a little introduction here, kind of what your history is with watching the Game of Thrones show and anything else?
I watched it. It was good. I'm a terrible human being. I think, started watching it like in mass around like season 4 or 5, and then I was caught up. But yeah, I'm a terrible human being.
And then you like the rest of us, watched each season as it slowly aired?
Yes.
Except for Josh here. Josh.
I just sat underneath my rock, happy as a clam.
All right. So to get started here, we watched the first 4 episodes of season 1 of Game of Thrones. The first 4 episodes were Winter is Coming, The King's Road for episode 2, Lord Snow for episode 3, and then episode 4 was titled Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things.
Good stuff.
So I would say, just to get started here, these first 4 episodes were just filled with detail, just little things about the different people we were introduced to, the houses, the different points throughout Westeros there, and Essos too, I believe the other part there. But I mean, we learned, we went up to the wall, we went over to Nick, you might have to help remind me, where was Dany at the start of that?
She was on the road through the Great Grass Sea on the way towards Vaes Stothrak.
Where did she start, though, with that house?
She was at Illyrio's house in Pentos.
Pentos.
It's one of the free cities. There's 3 big ones on the west coast of Essos.
Okay.
I'm going to turn off my volume on my phone.
Yes, thank you, Gary. Yep. So we stretched all the way around there. We met all of I shouldn't say all of. We met a lot of the big key players here to kind of start off the show with. So
a lot of people.
Just to kind of go over here, just the first part of the introduction of the show there basically is something that it's kind of a cold open to the show. It ties into the larger thing of what the show was kind of working towards there, but it's just the introduction of the Night's Watch, and then the people they classify as the others, the wildlings, and then I think even to the name White Walker is dropped in there too. So JC, just going to kind of go over to you here first, kind of just starting off with that introduction there.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I've had actually forgotten that White Walkers were actually so quickly visible, because at least for the first few episodes, for sure, I can definitely tell you that, they don't really come back up as a visual thing for a while. So yeah, it was good to get a refresher to see that. And yeah, really great horror style opening. I was watching the show with my girlfriend, and we'll see how long that lasts. It's not her type of show usually. She likes the more sitcom-y, happy shows. So I don't expect that by the end of season 1 she'll be into it.
This is totally a rom-com.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, but at that point she was already ready to check out, and I was like, it's not this most of the time. Don't worry. It's not as straight up horror. But yeah, it was a nice, awesome, strong opening, I thought.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. Gary, you look like you were wanting to talk just a little bit about that opening.
I was just thinking, as I was watching it, knowing that there's White Walkers, knowing the setting, it was realizing when you got this cold open, there was no explanation of where you were, like that you were north of the wall, like anything. It's just like you're in this world and people just hanging out in the woods and fucking crazy children hanging off trees that come and attack you.
Yeah. Definitely those blue eyes too. There, kind of just a big point there of when the eyes open, all of the eye. Like, I think there, I think there was that shot too of like looking at the creature in the forest there, and then like the whole thing, the whole part of it's like silhouetted in the darkness there, but you see the bright blue eyes there, indicating that this is not a natural thing that's coming after this guy.
Nick, a question of symbolism. Later on, the White Walkers have like something like a spiral. Is there representation of the O that's in that cold open?
A little bit.
There's I thought it was a different symbol that was.
There's a reference definitely to sort of the old world. The show references a little bit in this first episode too, like when we're in Winterfell, the place where the Starks are from, and you see the God's Wood, the tree area there where they have their werewood tree that's carved. That sort of touches back to the old gods, or the old way that the Starks are an older family lineage and how things used to be before things were quote unquote more civilized. And yeah, there's much more symbolism, much more, what would be kind of pagan deities and rituals. And so absolutely that circle thing at first is they're not just placed there randomly. There's definitely something ritualistic and probably pretty nefarious what that's tied to.
So then we jump into like, I'll probably touch on this point just a little bit, kind of throughout the season here or whatever, throughout the shows too. It's basically just you get hit with the big thing right away after that whole cold open scene happens. It's just the introduction music. Everybody, when this thing was going on, everybody, you hear those beats there, and you instantly knew this is the Game of Thrones theme song here. So, I cannot pronounce the composer's name here. I just had this open to in Spotify. It's like Ramin Djawadi or
something like that. Whatever it is, he's awesome.
Yeah,
good stuff.
Just the introduction to the show here is just so good. Like all throughout Game of Thrones run there, that's the one thing I will definitely comment highly and praise on. It's just like the music is just so good. It basically does a good job of like setting up the scenes and everything, just kind of lightly playing in the background when it needs to, or just kind of getting that motivation going with everything. But then too, touching on the introduction there too, like it starts with like a CGI kind of overview of the world there, basically, of the land of Westeros and kind of where all the main characters end up. So you get to see like Winterfell, and then each location has also got the house sigil of the main family that is inhabiting that area. So you got the dire wolf with the Starks there. Then they take you down to like King's Landing, which is the stag for Baratheon.
I think it starts with King's Landing. It starts with King's Landing and the stag, then to Winterfell, then to the wall with no sigil.
Yep.
And then to Pentos.
Pentos, okay. With actually, I don't even think Danny's the dragon symbol ever shows up on the map, but at least
I guess a non-spoiler for JC is that as new locations are added throughout the show, the map in the opening changes.
Yep.
So
very
that's
helpful.
why I made a note like what the first episode was, because by the fourth episode it's slightly different.
Yep. And then definitely too, like I also like the little touch they add to the introduction. This doesn't happen in the first episode, but it happens like every episode after, of like after the actor's name or before the actor's name or whatever is their house sigil there. So like Kit Harington plays Jon Snow, his house sigil is the direwolf there, or Sean Bean, Ned Stark there. So I always thought that was a nice little touch there. Basically, they had to everything with that.
That's very cool. I did not catch that.
So
I think I do remember, but I didn't. I watched the intro on the first and the fourth. I didn't watch the other two or three.
Especially in these earlier videos, I really like that intro too, because like the way the animation shows the different buildings going up is like they're building from the ground up. And especially in these first few episodes, there's so much introduction and prologue of who these characters are and how they know each other that yeah, exactly. They're like building up. This is what's going on. Here's the building blocks and the foundations you need to know of where these places are for who these people are. It's a good touch.
Yeah. So then moving on to here, we get our introduction to the Stark family there, the inhabitants of Winterfell there. So Nick, is there much kind of in the lore book there about just the Starks and kind of Winterfell?
Absolutely.
To kind of keep it brief here, I mean, we could probably spend most of the episode
entire
talking.
time going through this book. So again, for those of you not familiar, I'm going through the book called "The World of Ice and Fire: The Untold History of Westeros and the Game of Thrones" by George R. R. Martin. He helped write a lot of the information in the book, pulled from his own thoughts and what he's got in store for the world, and also by Elio Garcia Jr. and Linda Antonsen. And yeah, it has an entire chapter like thick on each of the different seven kingdoms. It tells the history just in general of like the Targaryen kings and leads up to the point right where this movie essentially starts, which covers 300 years. And then also it covers a little background information on each of the seven kingdoms. You know, Dorne down in the south, what essentially becomes the Crown Lands, where the Targaryens have King's Landing. The Westerlands, where the Lannisters are from, over in the west. The Reach down in the south, which you don't hear too much of in these early episodes, and then certainly the North, which goes all the way back to like almost the beginning of time, essentially, right after when the White Walkers are sort of first introduced as a threat, and humanity realizes that they pose a threat from the North. So one of the earliest Starks in history's existence, known as Brandon or Bran the Builder, sets to task with several, people and even some of the giants who inhabit the area at the time to build the wall that keeps all the crazies to the north and Seven Kingdoms safe. And yeah, like we talked about Lord of the Rings in the last episode, history becomes legend, legend becomes myth, and it just sort of fades from memory that people. Yeah, this happened, but nobody really remembers it. But yeah, as far as the Starks in the North, there's a great, great deal of information as far as who they are and what leads up to this. And yeah, even the recent history of Robert's rebellion against the Targaryen kings, which essentially sets in motion where we pick up in this world. It's about 6 to 9 years right after that's happened. And so he's a young king. Is it longer?
It's a couple episodes in, but it's in a scene of where they talk about Jon Snow, and Kat says that Ned left for war 17
11.
years ago,
Right,
and came back a year later with Jon.
Gotcha. So yeah,
writing down pages and timelines as I was
exactly. Well, that's helpful. And so essentially, yeah, Robert's been king, but not for terribly long. And I don't need to go into too much of the detail unless I need to right here, Tyler. You can kind of rein me in if I need to. But yeah, it's he's just not really feeling it. Like, he's king and he's in charge, but he's not content.
He's an absent king of if anything. There, basically,
absolutely
he wants the glory that goes along with being king, but he doesn't want to do the day-to-day nitty-gritty ruling there.
Absolutely.
JC, we'll kind of throw it over to you. We've been talking here a little bit here. Kind of your introduction to House Stark there.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, the idea of the Starks, I think, is a great one. I certainly feel like the Midwest winters have helped me identify with them a lot more rather than any of the other characters. Which, especially given that, from what I understand of the rest of the show, at least, that from what I saw, they seem to be like the main characters you're following them. So they do a good job of setting them up as being sort of the straight lead-ins, the ones that you can follow along with as much as you can. But there definitely is a lot of that sort of, you can tell that it is such a rich world, and there's so many things that have led up to this scenario that you're always just kind of, it's one of those shows where if you're watching with someone else who knows that you've seen it before, they're always someone like, oh, what's this about? And you're like, I don't know either. I'm here as well. They have not discussed this. They're just talking about it. But yeah, I think it's a strong intro and strong characters as well. I like them.
Okay. Yeah, to just kind of give just a little brief more introduction to about House Stark. So we're introduced to House Stark here with Ned Stark, or I think his actual name is Eddard Stark.
Correct.
played by Sean Bean. He is the leader, father figure, main head of the house there. He's installed by Robert as Warden of the North, which means it is his responsibility basically to keep the northern families in line while Robert is king, right? Okay.
Yep.
And then he is married to Catelyn. Her maiden name was Tully from the Riverlands, which we'll get a little bit more into them there. She was, and this is maybe a little bit more history too about that. She was originally supposed to be married to Ned's brother Brandon, I think.
Correct.
Brandon Stark, who was murdered. Though you find that out later on in these first 4 episodes. You learn that Brandon Stark and Ned's father were murdered at King's Landing there, which kind of go back into then the backstory of this all kind of leads around into ties up into Robert's rebellion there. But so Ned married Catelyn, and then they had kids there. They have the oldest boy named Robb Stark. And then there is the next one in line would be the daughter Sansa Stark with the red hair in there. And then I think it would be, so the legitimate sons. Let's stick with the legitimate children first before we get over to Jon. Then there is, I think it's Bran Stark there.
Bran Snacks, yep.
A younger boy with darker hair. Then you meet Arya Stark. I kind of put a note in here. She's like the little tomboy, basically. She does not want to basically be a proper lady at all in this world. She wants to be a fighter, just kind of rebellious person there. She just doesn't want to be tied down to anything. And then you don't meet him, but his name is mentioned. Maybe you do meet him in the introduction there, but
in a tree near the archery, like
he's sitting there watching Bran shoot arrows. Yeah.
Okay, yep. So then it's Rickon Stark, the youngest Stark child there.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as I alluded to a little earlier there is Jon Snow. He has been proclaimed as Ned Stark's bastard son, who Ned brought back from the war, basically. And the reason he had... So it's kind of an interesting thing here to learn about. Nick and I spent some time looking at this over lunch today, actually, to kind of figure out. So all of the children who are known as bastards in the world of Westeros, there have these certain last names kind of associated with them, depending on where they are born and raised at. So Jon Snow is a bastard child in the north. Everyone with the last name of Snow basically is in the north. And there are other names kind of brought up throughout the show here. It's not really a spoiler to kind of talk about any of that, but it's just kind of another little detail that they bring into the show here, that this world has all of this history and these rules and stuff associated where, if you're a child who's a bastard born and raised in the north, your last name will be Snow. You are not a child of your father. You don't take your parents' last name in those instances there.
Yeah, for being in that... it's probably the second episode, Lord Snow, when Jon actually goes up to the wall and he meets at the crossroads there with Ned. And Ned says, yeah, you may not have my name, but you have my blood. He's his bastard son. And so that much connects him to it, which is really interesting. It's both the benefit of everybody knows who Jon Snow is because he's tied to a very important family. But it's also has that weight of derogatoriness because every time they call him a Snow, it references his broken lineage, and that he's a bastard. He's not an official son of Ned Stark.
Also, with the children, just on notes I took along the way, Bran is 10, Sansa is 13.
Oh, that's good.
Okay.
Helpful to keep in mind.
Yep. Just a few more things too about the Stark family too. So every major family in Westeros has a name, not a name, a phrase kind of associated with them. So the Starks, their big phrase is like "Winter is coming," and then their sigil there to kind of represent who they are on their banners is a dire wolf head. So to kind of then go a little bit further into the kind of the introduction of the Stark family there, the Stark children, the males are taken out because they have captured. You see this scene a little earlier there. They have captured somebody from who has fled the northern wall. They're part of the Night's Watch there. It's one of the guys you find you watch basically in that cold open there. He has escaped his attackers and he has fled south of the wall. Well, part of the rules of being a part of the Night's Watch is if you leave your post, you are basically committing treason or swearing off your brotherhood there, which basically means you are sentenced to death there. And then Ned being part of this old Stark family, their kind of tradition is like, as he says to Bran there, basically like the reason he becomes the person to swing the sword is that he says the person who passes the judgment should be the one to carry out the sentence there. And then just a little.
I also made that note. And that's foreshadowing to some other things that happened in, I think, maybe episode 2 or 3 about like him and the direwolf.
Yep. And that's actually all in the first episode still there. You're talking about the dead stag and the direwolf scene, right? Where then the Stark children get their direwolf pups.
Talking about Lady and a...
Okay.
Sansa's direwolf lady.
Yep. Thank you. That is definitely a couple episodes ahead there, but yep. But then, like, just to kind of point out there, you get to see Ned's giant sword he wields out there to do the beheading there, called Ice.
It's sweet.
It's a very, very big sword.
So they reference it as Valyrian steel, and yeah, in the history, the Valyrians, who the Targaryens come from, like Targaryen is just a family name, but like their race of beings with that really fair hair, and in the books I have like purple eyes, are called Valyrians. And old Valyria was a town of a city far off across the Narrow Sea, where all the Targaryens essentially came from. And they were prized for making swords and weapons of great renown. And I think throughout the show, you're introduced to several family heirloom swords that are Valyrian steel. And it's like the cream of the crop in the world.
I think too, even it's like it's supposed to be lighter than just a regular steel sword. All right. So then next we jump over to King's Landing for a brief scene there. So King's Landing is the basically capital city of Westeros there. It is kind of founded from these Targaryens who first made landfall there. Correct me if I'm wrong, Nick. I believe it was Aegon the Conqueror, who everyone refers to him as, the first Targaryen to basically make landfall in Westeros with their dragons. And where they landed there on Westeros became known as King's Landing, which is where they set up their seat of power and the Iron Throne and everything like that.
Correct.
So here you're introduced to brother and sister Jaime and Cersei Lannister. They have just kind of
great folks.
Yes, great family there. Gary, you want to pick up a little bit here, kind of talking about just the introduction of kind of Jaime and Cersei meeting and talking there?
I actually didn't, when I was watching that, I didn't even remember that conversation. The whole like sort of story of season 1 or up to that point, that there was some conversations they were having about like there's a secret, like just realizing that I didn't even realize that scene was in there. I didn't think until like episode 2 that you found out that there's some secrets. But yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, the very first thing that Cersei says is, "Do you think he knew?" It's like, knew what? What's going on?
Yeah, it's just something in these first couple episodes where like there's lots of conversations that are had that you don't have the full context of, so you have to like, something's going on, but I don't know if you like. Other than that, like the Lannisters don't really talk that much this episode, or like it's anyway. I just between episode 1 and 2, like people definitely shine in episode 1, and other people shine in episode 2, like telling backstory. But
just a quick note for the viewers here: we had JC had to drop off there. His internet connection was a little too bad where he was, and we were all just sounding terribly robotic. So unfortunately, JC is not going to be here for the rest of the podcast, so we will unfortunately have to soldier on without him here.
Now his watch has ended.
Now his watch has ended today. So after we have that little kind of conversation with Jamie and Cersei there, we get the kind of introduction that um the king's army or kind of bodyguards, or basically the traveling group that the king is going with to King's Landing there has kind of been spotted by Bran there, basically, and they have realized that the Raven had reached them, that the king is making his trip to to the north to talk to Eddard, Ned Stark there. So they are kind of preparing for the king to arrive at Winterfell there.
It was in one of the episodes, I can't remember. I think it's the first episode. They explained that trip took a month.
Yeah,
Like they were on there for a month, and like I didn't ever realize that. I assumed it was like maybe a week's travel.
Yep, I think that was something. I think Cersei actually had mentioned that. She was complaining that they had been on the road for a month, and Robert was like going to try and quickly run down to the crypt part there where Lyanna Stark is buried there. So
very telling.
Yes.
Of his character.
Yes. So we are introduced to Robert Baratheon there. Robert Baratheon, aka King Baratheon, the leader of House Baratheon in this instance, because he is sitting on the throne. Nick, what do we got on House Baratheon there?
Again, a ton of information. So just recent history. Robert's father, Stefan Baratheon, I believe is his name, Steffon, was hand of the king to Aerys Targaryen, the Mad King, the king before Robert. And as Aerys Targaryen, second of his name, became more and more estranged and crazy and kind of lost to his own thoughts and what was going on, he actually sent Stefan off to go find Rhaegar Targaryen, his son, a daughter, and was lost at sea, essentially, to abbreviate the story a little bit. And so Aerys, in a way, was the cause of Robert's dad dying as well. And so he really didn't have much love for Aerys to begin with. And then after his son Rhaegar essentially abducted his fiancée, Lyanna Stark, he like lost it for the Targaryens. And as he said, I think it's in that second episode, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but in that second episode on the King's Road, he says, I'll kill every Targaryen I get my hands on. So he has zero love for the Targaryens. As Baratheon, then when his father passes, he becomes the head of the Baratheon household. And then after his rebellion, he ends up winning the rebellion. So the people there of power make him king. And to help reunite sort of the torn alliance that existed between the Lannisters and the Targaryens, Robert takes Cersei, Tywin's daughter, to wed. And so he's married to Cersei Lannister, his wife.
Is Robert the oldest? I thought
Robert is the oldest, yes. The oldest, and at the time was the strongest. He has two brothers, Stannis and Renly. We see Renly on the small council.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that Robert's the oldest, but I'm not sure.
I want to say it was Stannis, but I'd have to look that up to confirm for sure. But I mean, in my mind, it would made sense that they made Robert king because Robert was it was his rebellion there and everything like that. He was the one who kind of unseated the Targaryen rule there to become.
Gotcha.
That in my mind, that's kind of how I can piece that together. But I'm not going to say that's the right thing either, too.
It's the comments, man. People are going to tear us apart in the comments.
Yeah, send your corrections now. So House Baratheon, their sigil is the stag. Correct. And their phrase or motto or words is ours is the fury.
Mm-hmm.
Ours is the fury.
Okay. And they are typically, though, House Baratheon is from what part of Westeros?
So House Baratheon, they exist in the castle known as Storm's End, which is in the Stormlands. The Stormlands are kind of to the south, just below the Crown Lands and where King's Landing is, but they're not in the southernmost point of Westeros, which is Dorne, the Sands area.
Okay. All right. So after that kind of just like introduction to the um the king's procession there and stuff like that, I think they meet. Robert gets to Winterfell and he meets the Starks, and then he goes to the crypt with Ned there to find Lyanna's grave there. And then we jump over to meet the last two Targaryen children still alive on this continent here. I think I'm gonna get his name wrong. It's Viserys. Viserys.
Yeah.
Viserys.
Viserys. And then his sister Dany or Daenerys Targaryen. They're the last two remaining Targaryen children there from the Targaryen family there. So the Targaryens are the original rulers of Westeros. They basically ruled Westeros since they landed, pretty much, didn't they, at King's Landing there?
Correct.
Their big thing was they flew over to Westeros on dragons, which greatly turned the tide of any battle they were ever a part of there for the uniting and conquering of Westeros, as well as I guess they basically just ruled for that long. And their house sigil is the three-headed dragon, I believe. And then their I don't remember what their
Fire and blood.
Fire and blood is their motto, their house words. So it's kind of interesting. You meet Dany there. She is kind of getting groomed to try and be kind of passed off as a wife to the great Khal Drogo there, played by Jason Momoa there for his early days of just rocking out to everyone. Aquaman, Gary. He's Aquaman.
Just admit you have a man crush on him.
Hey, he's a big dude. He could
speak fucking gibberish for the whole fucking show. He just speaks fucking gibberish.
he speaks Dothraki, Gary. But you're kind of introduced to him there too. He's supposed to kind of show up and see, does he want to take Daenerys as his wife, basically, which then would mean that he's also promising his army to help Viserys go back and retake Westeros there, because Viserys thinks he's the proper king of Westeros still, even though his family was usurped by Robert Baratheon.
Correct. There's an interesting point in there really quick that I didn't want to jump over. I had a note that I wrote down. When Dany is getting ready or prepared for her introduction to Khal Drogo, she takes a bath. And as she's walking into the water, one of the maids that's attending her comes in and says, "It's not ready yet. It's far too hot, Khaleesi." And she steps into this water that essentially is almost boiling and doesn't flinch. Interestingly, I noted that that's very different than later on in these first 4 episodes. We see Viserys, that we mentioned earlier, Dany's older brother, is in a bathtub with one of the maids that is there, who's, she's giving him a bath, and she pours a candle on him, and he flinches from the hot wax and says, "Ow, that hurts." And I thought that was interesting, that apparently she can take hot temperatures, but it seems to affect him. There's just an interesting dichotomy between the two.
Yeah.
Also, Nick, before the bath, when there was a scene where forgot his name already, Viserys first uses the term "Don't wake the dragon," which is his personal motto.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you kind of get the feeling that he doesn't care too much about anyone else other than his
absolutely,
his ability to try and reclaim power.
I wrote down sort of a little adjective with each different character as they were introduced, and kind of changed a couple of them as the first 4 episodes went on. But that interesting adjective kind of described that character as they went, and increasingly Viserys' character was unhinged and reckless. Like, the more and more he interacted with other people around him, the people he considered to be his army, or Khal Drogo was his servant, and Dany was, his sister even. But he treated each of them with disdain, and just, that they're lesser than dirt to him, ultimately so he can get the Iron Throne and get back across the Narrow Sea. And increasingly, he just seems to alienate everybody he deals with. So, but we'll see how well that ends up for him.
Mm-hmm.
So, I also have a note that we introduced to Dothraki, and then, I don't know, Tyler, if you're getting to it, Dany's reaction after meeting Khal Drogo that she was kind of nervous, and then Viserys. I wrote down what like the exact thing he said, which is like, I would let his whole tribe fuck you, all 400 men and their horses, if that's what it took.
Yep.
Yeah, unhinged.
It kind of goes back to him just kind of seeing everybody else beneath him. He is the one true ruler. It is his birthright to kind of come back and retake the throne.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So then kind of as we start rolling more towards the end of the episode, we're introduced to Uncle Benjen Stark. He is the first ranger of the Night's Watch there. He has come down to the festival that is being hosted at Winterfell. And then you get kind of some brief character interactions that are kind of cool. You get Tyrion meeting Jon Snow, and they kind of have an interesting conversation. Basically, Tyrion kind of informs Jon of basically like, don't let them use the word bastard to kind of deter you, because they're just using it to kind of poke and gouge you there. Just wear it like armor. It is who you are. The rest of the world won't let you forget it.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good.
Sansa has a conversation with Cersei there, which is their first kind of conversation, which is kind of interesting. I think she even calls her Little Bird, which is kind of funny there. And then you have Jaime talking to Ned there a little bit, and you kind of get that. I know it's covered in the first 4 episodes there. I know it's not completely covered here, but you kind of get that little backstory of Ned kind of has a somewhat weird disdain for Jaime because of what Jaime did there, basically. Basically, to kind of jump a little bit ahead here, because I'm pretty positive this is covered in the first 4 episodes there, it is found out that Jaime was part of the Kingsguard, thank you. Protecting the king, and then as Robert's rebellion was getting to a close there and they were getting ready to take King's Landing, Jaime killed the Mad King at the end there, which kind of officially ended the rebellion. Yep, it officially ended the rebellion, and Jaime talks about how the king was mad at the end there, basically just yelling, "Burn them all, burn them all."
Mm-hmm.
So then we kind of jump back over to Dany and the Dothraki. They've got the Dothraki wedding going on there. I wrote down an interesting line that was kind of said there is basically a Dothraki wedding without at least 3 deaths is kind of dull. As right. Dany just watches these 2 guys fight over this other gal, and then one of them gets gutted and has his throat slit there at the end. Then you're introduced to Jorah Mormont, who has a conversation with Daenerys. And then his name is Ilio, right? The guy they stay with
correct.
In Pentos. Ilios, as a wedding gift, gives Dany 3 dragon eggs, which is kind of fun because it symbolizes like 2 of the 3 heads of the dragon there for House Targaryen.
Mm-hmm.
And then
he makes the comment that the dragons long since have turned to stone, and so they're almost as more so symbolic. It's not as if he's giving them dragons.
Yep, exactly. They're not like they're not thought of as actual dragon eggs. They're like
correct
hardened eggs that used to be dragon eggs that are just kind of more of a decorative thing that you kind of learn that people find to be very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Like a Fabergé egg.
Yes, a Fabergé egg. Good pull there, Gary. And then so next it comes back to Winterfell there, where you see Bran climbing up another tower there. So earlier in the episode you had seen Bran climbing up a tower there. His mother yelled at him to not do that because she was afraid he was going to fall. Well, Bran starts hearing noises as he gets higher up and higher up in the tower, and he gets to the window and peers in and finds brother Jaime and sister Cersei going at it there. Mm-hmm. And then they happen to catch him there and kind of stop him at the window from crawling back down. And Jaime kind of makes it seem like he's reassuring Bran that nothing's going to happen and nothing's going to happen. He turns back to Cersei and says, "The things I do for love," pushes Bran right out the window, and the episode ends with Bran falling to the ground.
Right.
I think that's a good... I also wrote down the things I do for love. It's Nick and I were talking about this yesterday, that he's a bad... Like, Nick thought he was a bad guy, and I think he's just a cocky guy who cares about family. Like, so he didn't hurt Bran in a vengeful way. He hurt it to defend his family.
Right. The ends justify the means.
So he wasn't just like, I don't know, recklessly stabbing him for fun. He's not a sociopath. He's just somebody who won't let anything come, between him and what he wants, or what is what it, because it's not just what he needed. In the grand scheme of things, it wouldn't have hurt him, but it would definitely hurt his sister if anyone found out that his sister was being unfaithful. So
Yes.
I think he's just an awesome guy.
He's your
Misunderstood. He's just misunderstood.
Yeah, I actually wrote down a little bit going back and with kind of the tinted glasses of having a little bit of backstory from reading this history book here on the subject. Everything mentioned about Jaime is that he's just sort of like this greater than great, holier than thou, great knight, very honorable, would always do the right thing. One of the youngest members appointed to the King's Guard for Aerys, the Mad King. Obviously turned out that he ended up killing him. Won his spurs, essentially, is the phrase that means he became a knight at 16, so very, very young. And was even in a couple battles early on. I think later in this episode, not this episode, but later in these first 4 episodes, we hear that he was at the battle to fight Pike when the Greyjoys came up in a rebellion a couple of years ago as well. And so so he's battle tested.
He said he was, but yeah.
So he's battle tested. He's a knight. He's a foreseen as an honorable guy. And so it's just very interesting. I wrote down a couple notes throughout these episodes about, what happened first. Did Jaime decide? Was he always sort of a cocky, kind of sarcastic kind of guy, kind of in your face because he had the title and had the good family standing and his background coming from the Lannisters to back that up? Or did he kind of start off as this really good, wholesome person and then sort of detour into this, person realizing, hey, I can get away with murder, literally, when he realized that, I can kind of do what I want and take what I want, in the form of either his sister or, other people's lives as playthings to defend his family at all costs.
All right, so keep moving along here. We're going to jump into episode 2 now, which basically I believe starts off with them out on the King's. Well, no, the episode 2 is called the King's Road. Sorry.
Correct.
It opens with the Dothraki.
Which is interesting. I like that. It's not just the King's Road, which is the name of the road in Westeros, but Khal Drogo and Khaleesi, who is the queen now, which is what Dany is, are kind of seen as the king of the Dothraki, and so it's kind of their road as well.
Yeah, where they're walking to you'll have to repeat the name again of this Dothraki city there, Nick.
Oh, they're headed towards Vaes Dothrak.
Yes, okay. Wrote down there to kind of talk about Jon is getting ready to he wants to head north to the Night's Watch there. He ends up talking to Jaime. Jaime gives him some advice, air quotes there, and some half-hearted thanks for him volunteering his life to become a member of the Night's Watch. But then also too, I like this next scene here is just Jon and Arya's interaction. You can kind of see that both of them really kind of like one another a lot more because they're both kind of seen as outcasts of the family. Arya is like that tomboy who does not want to become a pretty lady, and Jon is the bastard of the family there, literally. So they kind of you can tell basically through their interactions that they care for one another a lot more. But this is where Jon presents Arya with the sword he had made, which Arya calls Needle, because, as Jon says, all great swords deserve a good name.
Even her name is sort of a little sting against her sister Sansa, who she just likes to torment, in the sense that she says, Sansa has her sewing needles, which was a nod back to that first episode about how great Sansa was praised for her feminine needlework when she was sewing. And she says, Sansa can keep her needles. I've got a needle of my own. That hers is much more lethal.
And then, go ahead.
Circling back, there was a conversation with Kat and the Queen. I have my notes kind of in chronological about the Queen's firstborn son and brown of hair, and I didn't know if that was in the. One of you maybe know if that was in the books or if that was just an added scene.
It's not in this book that I have here.
I
I don't know
don't
if one of the books you've read.
I don't remember if that conversation's in the books or not. Not to jump too far ahead, I think there is a discussion that is had later on that kind of maybe cements that a little bit more as something to kind of discuss further.
Yeah, a non-spoiler like flag that rewatching you notice is
Yeah.
that scene.
I
Leaving
had a
it at
question.
that.
I had a question for you both on this, sort of to pose a question to you both. Do you think that was real? Like, it's not really well known, or it's. I was trying to look at her face and read her expressions as she was talking, because it's certainly in these first 4 episodes we get the sense that Cersei doesn't mince words. Like, if she's willing to be threatening, she'll say something, you know, to get a rise out of people. And so everything she does seems to be done with a purpose. What was the motive for being so vulnerable when we know as an audience that she was there? The reason her Catelyn's son Bran is injured, clinging to his life in the bed there, is because of what she was doing. So why be vulnerable in that moment? It's one thing to go in and save face and say, I'm terribly sorry. I hope he wakes up and leave. But for her to divulge that openness, do you think that was a made-up story, or do you think that was real?
Assumed it was real as a wink to the viewer on a rewatch, or
Okay.
with foregone knowledge. Because if you assume that later, not trying to spoil things later, about Cersei's motives and her children, that maybe there was that's a deeper backstory as to why that kid died.
Interesting.
I think it was real, but it's kind of more of like it could be seen as just trying to be used as like a tactical advantage of like to show somebody you can get down to their level of empathy and everything like that, but also still kind of working your way into kind of finding a way to assume power or something like that. Because a lot of what Cersei does is basically she gains power through knowledge, her motivations, her actions, and her ability to kind of somewhat outthink people. So it's just kind of adding another puzzle piece to her repertoire there of, I am able to kind of come at you like a real human being. So you think I'm a decent person, but in the end, I'm really not a good person.
That's interesting insight. I think that you're very right. Each character that we were introduced with, even in these early shows, show multiple ways that they interact with other people. If they feel comfortable with somebody, they kind of let their guard down and say how they really feel, very blatantly. Whereas they can also, have some intrigue and, sort of put on a face or a fake smile for a different person. It's not always just sticking with the pointy end, as Arya says about her sword needle. It's the subterfuge and the interactions that make it really interesting.
Anyway, moving on from that bedside, I guess, unless you have anything else, Nick, about Cersei, I'm sure we'll get more into Cersei.
Nope.
You talked about needle, and I also noticed in that scene, Arya's talking to Lymeria, and said, Lymeria, gloves. And it's sort of, I think, a wink that there's a deep bond between the Starks and their direwolves.
So,
certainly.
yep. So Arya's name is Nymeria with an N there. That's a good point. We didn't touch on that from episode 1 there too. So there was a scene where after they did the beheading of the guy in the Night's Watch, they came across a stag that had died from a direwolf attack, and then the direwolf had also succumbed to injuries because it had an antler basically lodged in where it was. And apparently this direwolf was a mother because she had a bunch of pups with her. And then it was, I think, 5 or 6 pups total, basically enough for each of the Stark kids. Well, so Robb got one, Sansa got one, Arya got one, Bran, Rickon, and then Jon also got one there. So that would be 6.
At the end.
The 6.
After they determined the direwolves are going to live, like, oh, well, there was actually a 6th one we thought was dead. You can have that one.
Yep. And
Theon Greyjoy says, yeah, the runt of the litter.
Yep, and Jon gets a white, the albino one, basically, because I think it even had the red eyes as well, too. Yeah, that was kind of a nice thing too, of like the House Stark with their dire wolf sigil. Each of the Stark's children gets these dire wolves that they kind of have this connection and bond with.
I guess rolling back to that scene, going back to episode 1, do you think there was some symbolism in that scene that there was a stag, which is the Baratheons, the
Correct.
dire wolf Starks get stabbed by the No, like it didn't. If it was symbolic, it wasn't very good symbolism. But
I thought it. You go ahead.
I would say there probably was some good symbolism, because I also notated down that like Ned seemed very nervous or kind of uncomfortable about what he has seen right here, of this kind of house stag and this house direwolf had basically in a combat have basically killed one another. So he seemed like very kind of nervous throughout that whole scene there. You could just tell something didn't sit right with him because of this.
well,
Everybody got.
it is like if he's from the north, he probably knows what a full-grown direwolf could do to a human, and he's just like, we need to kill these fucking things, because if they're roaming free, they're gonna kill all of my, all the peasants and families around this area.
They were going to. Theon pulls out a knife and is ready to take them out. The young squire who's with the family, and I think it's Rob who mentions that there's a pup for each one of the Stark kids, and actually makes him stay his hand.
I think it's John who mentions that.
Is it John? Sorry.
Yep.
I do agree with what Tyler's saying about the symbolism there. Even in these early episodes, from what we've already seen, so we think we're free to discuss it. The wolf and the stag. Oh,
just keep going.
The wolf and the stag going at it with each other, and neither of them survives, which is very foreboding. With later on, you see at the inn, which I think is in this episode as well, the second episode, with Lady's wolf, with Sansa's wolf lady, which shows that the wolf doesn't survive when the stag, in this case, I'm trying to make an allusion to Robert Baratheon, is almost arguing with Ned Stark when they're at the inn about what happens with Joffrey and the butcher's boy. Is that Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark are kind of arguing back and forth? Is this what really your will is, that we kill these kids as pets because of what happened? And did we really need to run down the butcher's boy as the Hound takes him out, or did we really need to go to this extreme? Extreme is actually what Cersei says later. Looking back on that, that was probably too much. But this thought that the Stag family, the Baratheons, the ruling family, and the Wolf family, the Starks, are kind of at each other's throat, And in this analogy, it doesn't bode well that we see that the Stag and the Wolf both come out worse for the interaction. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple episodes.
All right. So we'll keep moving on kind of through the episode 2 there. John is getting ready to leave Winterfell and kind of head with Ned's and the King's group there, basically, as they make their way up the King's Road to head towards the wall. John is heading towards the wall. Ned and Robert are heading back towards King's Landing there. You could tell Kat really does not like John at all there, because John goes in to say his goodbye to Bran, and she just basically says, I want you to leave now, pretty much. And even like in episode 1-2, you get kind of a evil eye from Kat as she's up on the balcony watching their kids shoot the arrows and stuff at John.
Definitely staring at him.
But then
he can feel it. He looks up and realizes she's staring at him.
Ned walks in the room, and it through that conversation between Ned and Kat, it reveals the backstory of why there's some tension between Kat and Jon Snow.
Yep.
Yeah, it's your spouse's illegitimate child is living in the home that you have with your kids.
And made even worse too by the fact that Ned has always been kind of put up on this pedestal as being this honorable man who was sticks to like the way things should be done, not the way he wants to do right basically in the world, not the quickest way out.
Just a quick 10-second snippet here if I can, and I'll let you keep going, Tyler. I mentioned I wrote down some words for each of the characters. I wrote down protective of her family for Kat. Everything she does is for her kids. We mentioned when Bran, who's 10, has to go see the beheading, doesn't want him to go. Does he have to? He's only 10. With the other kids, be nice to your sister Arya and watch out for what's going on. and especially when Bran is injured, she's beside herself in those episodes. She just kind of sits on the side of the bed, stitching together the little dolls that she gives him before she leaves. She doesn't know what to do when she can't protect her kids. It's what her whole being is to look after her family. Everything she does seems to be in their aid. And then the same thing, like you mentioned with Ned, everything he does in these first few episodes is duty based. If the king asks me, I don't have a choice. I have to say yes because he's the king. And essentially, Kat screams at him, you always have the choice. You're not a robot. You can do whatever you need to do. And even later in these first 4 episodes, Cersei says the same thing. You're just a soldier. You take your orders and you carry on. And it's unconscionable for Ned to do anything wrong, which again just heightens the fact that somehow he has this kid and Jon Snow, and it just is this extreme blemish on who he is as a character. And yeah, his wife Kat can't deal with that. Sorry, I wanted to get that note out.
Good observation there. And then kind of you get the scene of them traveling up the King's Road there, and then there's the part where they're going to go, Ned and Jon are going to go their separate directions, and they have that conversation with one another of Ned basically saying, that line there of, you may not have my name, but you have my blood. And then they have a conversation there. Basically, Jon is wondering, can you tell me about my mother at least, or whatever? And Ned basically says to him, the next time we see each other, we will talk about your mother and kind of what happened here. So then they kind of have a little scene there of
I have a scene before that of the Rob and Jon goodbye.
Oh,
noted.
Yep.
Same thing too. Yeah.
Yep.
Have a really serious, do good, very lordly, and then all of a sudden they just give each other hugs, and you can tell that these two are just best friends because they're the same age. One of them's a Stark, and one of them's a member of the a member of the family, and they're both about the same age. And you can tell that they love each other as brothers from another mother. There's definitely a bond between them. So I thought that was an interesting scene and kind of pays off. Because I think Rob and Jon kind of are at different points in the story from this point on. So it's the last time I think you see them together for a while.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the last interactions they have for a while there. So then we kind of move on to the king and his procession has basically stopped along the road to take a break there, and Robert are having a conversation about the war basically there. Robert's trying to poke Ned, trying to figure out more about who this lady was that made the great Ned Stark give up his virtue there.
Right.
Robert mentions Bessie and her great big beautiful tits there. But then there's a lot of kind of him getting serious when he starts talking about the Targaryen children, because he knows that there are 2 Targaryen children left and he wants to go after them, but Ned keeps saying, no, that's not worth it there. And Robert kind of just talks about the fact that he thinks there's a war coming at some point in time. He just doesn't know when. He doesn't know who the enemy will be, but he just has that feeling that there is this war coming.
So in the background history there a little bit, Robert defeats Rhaegar Targaryen at the Battle of the Trident, which is forever thereafter known as the Ruby Ford, because he smashes Rhaegar Targaryen in the chest with his warhammer and drives his spike into his chest so hard that all the red rubies on Rhaegar Targaryen's breastplate go flying into the riverbed there. And so that little area of the Trident in the Riverlands is forever known as the Ruby Ford. During that battle, but then also at a subsequent battle thereafter, Robert is gravely injured. So he doesn't actually finish the charge into King's Landing. So he's not able to follow up to find out what actually happens or what goes down in those last few moments of the rebellion right before the Mad King is killed. And Aerys Targaryen sends his wife, who has a young, I think, 9-year-old son, Viserys, at that time, sends Viserys and his wife, Rhaella Targaryen, who is pregnant, we now find out later it's Dany, off across the narrow sea to get to safety. And that's where those two kind of take off running from.
Is my brief memory on the history of that, isn't Daenerys though born at Dragon's Stone? Because she's
Correct,
born
yep.
in because she's also. I'm not going to get into that part. Never mind. I think that comes up a little bit later when we kind of start talking a little bit more about Dany's history. So we'll just save that to the next
That
couple
works.
episodes there. But there is more to Dany's kind of history there of kind of her birth and everything like that.
I
Mm-hmm.
guess circling back to the general King, the Robert and Ned conversation, I made a note of you can see that there's like they're deep friends, but Robert says something like we were never young. There were wars to fight, women to marry. Oh, there were wars to fight, women to marry. We never had a chance to be young.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to, I guess, my deeper question is like, and the king himself, is he immature because he never got to be a child or be a teen?
Good point.
Or is he like, because yeah, the more you learn about Robert, you realize that like he was a badass, like just
Absolutely.
crushing motherfuckers, and like someone to be feared on the battlefield. But like in that sentence of like there were wars to fight, there were women to marry, like he just feels like everything that came after wars to fight was just a disappointment. Like
I
he
think so.
wanted to keep fighting and like just like live life at 100 miles an hour.
I wouldn't go as far as to say Robert is immature. I would say he's not a leader in the sense he does I don't think he really truly wants to be king. Like with all the response he wants all the pomp and circumstance that goes along with being king, but he doesn't want the rest of it that comes along with it of like the actual ruling the land and country inside. I mean, I'm not saying like any of the Targaryens were that way either, too, of like they did everything, but like Robert mainly just wants to be celebrated as being a king, to have ended the Targaryen dynasty, and he wants to drink, and I think he says he wants to drink and whore his way
Yeah.
to a grave. To his
To an
grave.
early grave.
Yep.
He wants, when he's in the crypt with Ned, he says, I want you to run my kingdom while I eat, sleep, and drink myself to an early grave. I want to touch one last time while we're talking about the mindset of Robert Baratheon. A big part of that is just the PTSD that he probably feels from losing his fiancee, Lyanna Stark, to Rhaegar Targaryen. Because the little bit of background that we know, even in this history book that I have, it references that Rhaegar Targaryen, just a couple months before Robert's rebellion kind of took off or got speed, what sort of threw everything over the edge is Rhaegar Targaryen, the eldest heir to the throne of the Mad King, kidnapped Lyanna Stark, Ned's younger sister, and Benjen's sister, and just disappeared with her, just absconded, like kidnapped her for months. Like no one knew where either of them were. And she's not around. She's actually buried in the crypt, they say later, that she died. And so no one knows what happened other than Rhaegar took her and now she's dead. And so then that's that line that in that interaction with Robert and Ned, Robert says, what they did to your family, after what Rhaegar did to your sister. And so we don't know, but seeing some of the brutality in this show already, we can only imagine what must have transpired there. And so of course that's sort of what threw him over the edge, because when he's in the crypt and he's talking about Lyanna and afterwards, or when Robert is trying to look at the crypt statue that Ned has for her, he says she should be somewhere on a hill where she can have the wind in her face and the sun on her face. I think, like you said, Gary, he lives now at 100 miles per hour, because I think if he stops and really thinks about what he's lost in his life, that weighs on him almost too much.
Well, he's just a barbarian at heart. Like he wanted to be king, but like he really just wants to rule by power and like just because he's the strong man, and he just the mindset of like I'm a warrior. Like why? Like that's why you me. Like all this other crap is just politics, and he wants nothing to do with the politics. He just
I don't
understands he won the throne. Like for him, it's like the victory purse of like a great, tournament. Like he beat the existing king or winner, and so now he's the top of the pecking order.
I think the spoils definitely would go to the victor, as you're talking about, but I don't think he fought the rebellion to become king. I think he mostly fought the rebellion to get back at the Targaryens and to depose them after what they had done to his friends and his wife, or would-be wife.
Somewhere later on, it talks about like once he won, then he had to rule.
Yeah, everyone was like, "Well, this was your idea, and you are the strong man."
Down the line, but it talks about all they had to do was take a step up and sit, and they could have been the king.
Sure.
But so anyway, we can move on from Robert. But yeah, he's just
we're getting off topic, Tyler.
He's an interesting dude. I just had that as like a rabbit hole.
Well, yeah, like I said though, kind of at the beginning of this first season for sure, and definitely a lot of these early episodes are just full of just so much detail, so much lore, so much history, just between the characters you see on screen, that it's great to just kind of sit back sometimes and just kind of soak that all in, as people who have like us three obviously have definitely seen this stuff more than I would say. We've all seen it at least one time. I've seen it multiple times. I don't know how many you guys have all seen it too, but it's nice to kind of just sit back and go, okay, yeah, everything kind of has a point and purpose to all of the conversations. I think one point that was made about Game of Thrones at one point in time is it's like, this is a show of people sitting around and having conversations. So it's great to kind of just learn all of that kind of story and history about that. But next point to kind of move on to in episode 2 there is like Tyrion is talking to Jon Snow as they're on their way up to the wall. And he kind of explains to Jon kind of like why he does what he does. Like Jon tries to make fun of him that Tyrion's got his nose reading a book there, but then Tyrion kind of explains, no, I read books and stuff like that because my mind is what sets me apart from basically everybody else in my family. Like Jaime is a tall, able-bodied, handsome knight. His sister is the queen. He is basically viewed as just this half-man, some demon dwarf kind of guy or whatever. So what elevates Tyrion is the ability to basically outthink and outwit people, which is what his biggest contribution to his character is.
I labeled that conversation as they talk about the King's Watch and their place in the world. So just like, I think it's kind of a follow-up to the conversation they have in the first episode, which is very like abrasive. Like, and then now that they're like just like on their way to they've had a chance to adjust to one another, they start to have a serious conversation about like, this Night's Watch isn't all the honor and bullshit that you think it is. Like it's really a consolation prize.
Yeah, good point too, because that's also where Jon sees that they've brought some captors with. They're basically two guys who are basically being sentenced to serve at the Night's Watch there. But then kind of moving on to our next scene there is the part where Robb enters the room to talk to Catelyn about some stuff there with Bran, but then all of a sudden a fire is started out in Winterfell there, and Robb takes off to kind of go out and look at it. Catelyn's looking out the window, then the camera pans back behind her, and you can see there's an assassin now behind her that was sent up to try and kill Bran. He says, "You're not supposed to be here." Catelyn and the assassin fight there. Her hands get all cut up because she's basically trying to use her hands to stop this dagger from her son. And then next we have Bran's direwolf, who I believe is named Summer. I don't know if it's kind of talked about in this episode or not, but Bran's direwolf is named Summer. Surprise.
Lady.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, they each have a name for each of their direwolves, which again, I don't know, maybe I'm reading into things, but I wrote down a note about the wolf Summer was staving off the cold winter of death and the assassin.
Yep, kind of.
I have it noted here that like I have the scene not just as fire as that Robb and Cat are in the same room, and all of a sudden you hear dogs barking, and Cat's like, "Can you please shut those fucking dogs up? Like they need to be done." And that's when Robb walks to the window, is like, "Holy shit, there's fire! That's why the dogs are barking. We're gonna get to the fire." And and I sort of put that down as like the reason the dogs were barking is like they're there to protect the Starks and their family, and so that's what that. And then I think it kind of at the end of that scene it kind of irons out the point that like these dogs are here to protect the family, and although the scene started with Kat being fucking pissed about the dogs barking, she was like, well, they were here, they're barking to help us. So
yeah, it kind of reinforces that connection the direwolves have with their Stark children,
being their sigil and being their pets as well.
Yep.
It's interesting to point out too. I don't know if you were going to mention it, but the assassin uses, as we mentioned, a Valyrian, very ornate dagger to do this dirty work. That's an important tie-in to these later 4 episodes.
Yep. So next, kind of it pans out to probably, I don't know why this is, but I remember when I started watching the show, I was just endlessly fascinated with the wall. It kind of, the next shot is basically then Jon kind of coming up over the hill to basically get his first realization and glimpse of the wall, this giant structure made of ice. I believe, Nick, you had mentioned it was made by Brandon Stark, or Bran the Builder, many, many thousands of years ago here, and it's kind of been guarded by the Night's Watch ever since to protect from the White Walkers and other stuff that lives up north beyond the wall. And I can't quite explain why, but I think like it was just such a cool visual to basically just see this giant structure just made by the men of this time, or actually before that time, made all out of all of this ice and everything like that. And it's kind of got all of this kind of history and lore behind it. And then you kind of get into the Night's Watch themselves there to kind of just hear kind of a little bit more about these guys who, kind of, as we kind of alluded to there, they were propped up at the beginning of kind of these honorary men and who served to kind of protect the people of the Seven Kingdoms, when you kind of slowly start to find out here that it's not really full of a bunch of honorary men anymore here.
Right.
I was going to kind of throw this over to you for a moment, Nick. Is there kind of much more on the history of just like the Night's Watch in the book?
There is, actually. It goes back, again, there's a whole chapter in this book. It's pretty great read. I don't remember all the specifics of it to recant here, but the Night's Watch is actually comprised of, there are 14 castles that line the whole of the wall that stretches essentially from sea to sea, covering all of the north to lock off the north beyond the wall. Of those 14 castles, there's only a handful that are mentioned in the series that we've heard in these first 4 episodes. But the main one where Jon is headed is Castle Black, which is where the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch is stationed. And from there, they kind of give out orders to the rest of the folks across the area.
Yep. And then they kind of enter out of this line there. So that kind of like then jumps back, I think, to Winterfell, where they're then dealing with the fallout of this assassin was there, and Catelyn kind of makes this proclamation that she thinks this assassin was sent there by the, I think, Lannisters at this point, because she had done some investigation and found that golden hair up in the tower where Bran had fallen from. So she makes this kind of assessment that she thinks that the Lannisters are behind it, but she needs to kind of talk to Ned about it or whatever, and she doesn't trust a Raven, so she thinks she's going to go to King's Landing by herself. But she really goes with their weapons that are their master of weapons or master of arms, Sir Roderick, I believe. But what I'm trying to allude to here, sorry, Gary, to cut you off there, but I'm trying to allude there that Rob thinks he should be the one to go, but she says, no, there must always be a Stark in Winterfell. It's kind of an interesting line that they kind of utter there. Gary, you had something there then?
Saying, like, I got some context that, one sentence context is that at that point, Bran had been in bed for a month.
Yep.
So getting to the point where it takes a month to get from King's Landing to Winterfell, like, this is around the time that, 1 month is how long it... So I think by the end of this episode, maybe Ned is in King's Landing.
That's actually, I have that noted at the beginning of episode 3 there, that Ned arrives in King's Landing there. So they're still on the road there, basically, and they then we jump over to the King's Procession there, and this is where, well, actually, no, sorry. I'm going to back up just a little bit here. There's one more thing that happens over across the Narrow Seas with Dany and the Dothraki there. She starts learning about ways to seduce or kind of civilize or kind of make it so it's not as rough to be with Khal Drogo there. So she starts learning the language and kind of starts learning some of the ways to pleasure her king there.
I'm struggling. You're struggling with how to communicate this.
It's just an interesting thing of Dany is trying to take more charge and ownership of her role as the Khaleesi of the Dothraki there.
Yeah. And I think I have it in my notes from episode 1 that like in the books, like Dany is I think like 14.
Yeah,
Like,
so
the show glosses over that real quick.
I think the show actually like bumped their ages up to be not creepy there.
I think it was 16 because it was 16 years since Robert's rebellion.
Yeah.
Then,
Yeah.
like approximately 16.
So you're right. Yeah, it definitely does gloss over a lot of that stuff when you think if you sit there and think about it real hard. That it's like some of this stuff is just kind of like, this is a little icky here.
I think it's also just like Dany, like probably never had a good parental figures, and all she had was a crazy ass fucking brother, and just like she's just trying to learn. Like she's a stranger in a strange land, and she's like just somebody who just even if she was in Westeros, she'd still need to know how to be a lady in Westeros, kind of like with the adventure Sansa is going through to learn how to be a proper lady. But she has to do it in the Dothraki horde. Like, there's kind of a parallel. Like, I think Sansa and maybe not. I think Jon and Daenerys are the same age about, but I don't know.
Close, yeah.
Yeah.
So she's just trying to learn. She's kind of looking for, like, I don't know, mentors. That's the word I was looking for. She's looking for mentors, and she gets it in the form of Dothraki whores.
Yes. So here we then jump back to the King's Procession there. We're kind of get an introduction. I wrote down Sandor Clegane. You kind of get a little bit more of an introduction to him, also referred to as the Hound.
Alien Payne, too.
Sorry, what?
Alien Payne, the Royal Executioner,
Yep.
with no tongue, is introduced, and that was like a character that, very well. Obviously, he doesn't talk, so in a show, lots of talking. Like very much just a background character, but definitely somebody with like a backstory that's like always around.
Mm-hmm.
He's his title is the King's Justice, which refers to he's the Royal Executioner, is what they call him. And he is mentioned in the end of King Aerys's reign, as he used to be at one time the hand of the king, until he had his tongue ripped out by Aerys, the Mad King, because he was overheard whispering to others that even though he wasn't hand of the king. He was talking about the hand of the king. At the time was Tywin Lannister, who is Cersei, Jaime, and Tyrion's dad, of Lord Warden of the West and the Lannisters of Lannisport. He was overheard talking about them, saying even though Aerys, the king, wears the crown, Tywin is really the one in charge, because Tywin, as the hand, was making all the orders and saying this is what needs to be done. And the Mad King, who was very distrusting of everybody, did not like hearing that he wasn't actually the king. And so he had Ilyn Payne's tongue ripped out with hot pincers, which is the line that the Hound gives him.
Yeah.
So keep moving on there. I've got a note there that Joffrey is a little fucker. This is you kind of start learning just a little bit about like the dark side of Joffrey there. Like you see kind of right. I mean, episode 1, you're kind of introduced to him being a little shit there when he's talking to Tyrion there, and Tyrion slaps him a bunch of different times there.
Great stuff.
But you kind of start seeing more of the darker side of Joffrey there when I can't remember the exact scene of what happens. I think it's the whole scene with him and Sansa are walking down by the river. They overhear Arya and the Butcher Boy kind of practicing sword fighting with one another. Joffrey thinks he's going to step over and kind of show everybody up and try and challenge the Butcher's Boy, but then Arya whacks him, I think, one, and then as Joffrey, I think, is like slowly trying to cut on the cheek of the Butcher's Boy, Arya whacks him with her stick there. Yes. He drops his sword, and then Arya like takes it from him and kind of shows him that he's not as big of a badass as he thinks he is.
Her dog jumps in.
Different thing, which is at the beginning of that, before that scene happens, there's a little bit of exposition between Joffrey and Sansa, where you can just tell that like they're smitten with each other because obviously they're two complete strangers, very attractive and very young. So like Joffrey is very much seducing Sansa as like, my princess can drink as much as she wants.
Yes. Yeah. And we should also back up too. It was kind of decided between Ned and Robert that their two houses would be joined together through marriage of Joffrey and Sansa because they couldn't have been joined together through Robert and Lyanna before.
Yes.
But then, yeah, so because...
The big scene of like things going fucking sideways, like there was a brief second where you're like, hey, maybe like there's a young love that's blossoming, and then shit hits the fan.
Yep. And then so Arya's wolf, kind of as a bit of protection for Arya there, I don't quite remember the exact details, kind of leaps out and also attacks Joffrey and bites his arm there. And then this kind of leads to some bad stuff happening to the Stark family there. Gary, you want to kind of just take over just a little bit about this?
So they after the Joffrey gets bitten, I think Arya and her direwolf run away, and so then there's a search party to try and find Arya, and in that process, Arya like tells her dog to fuck off because like bad things are gonna happen, and then when she's found, Ned's real fucking pissed because the Lannisters don't bring his daughter to him first. They bring his daughter in front of the king to answer for her crimes against the crown. So the note and then they decided that both of the parents will discipline their own children, and Robert, just a flash of like who Robert is as a parent and as a dad. He says, "You let a little girl disarm you." And it's just like very much that like he's a guy who used to swing a fucking warhammer. Like he has no fucking time of day for a son that like gets disarmed by a girl. His answer would have been like, "We're just fucking talk about that. Like shit happened. I lost my sword in the river. Why'd you lose your sword? Don't want to talk about it. Just lost my fucking sword." Like, just Joffrey's such a little whiny little fucking bitch. Like. Anyway.
Yeah.
And then because of the situation here, then it is determined that because they can't find Arya's wolf, the other dire wolf is punished because of that, which is Sansa's dire wolf lady. And this kind of ties back to episode 1 of like Ned takes over basically taking care of the dire wolf there. He doesn't want anybody else to deal with this because it's his responsibility of it being a dire wolf. The dire wolf is his house sigil and everything like that. So Ned is the one.
It's from the north. Yeah, it deserves better.
Yep.
She deserves better than a butcher. And then the very next scene, like you see the Hound ride up with the butcher's boy on a horse, and I didn't know if that was some sort of symbolism that like deserves better than a butcher. And then the next scene is like
the butcher's boy.
Oh,
yeah, the butcher's boy being run down there and everything.
He ran.
Yeah. So then, lady. So then Lady is killed by Ned, and kind of also at the same time they're kind of panning back and forth between like a slow rising shot on Bran laying in the bed. So they're panning back and forth between this scene of Ned getting ready to kill Lady and panning up Bran's legs up towards his face and everything like that. And like shortly after Lady is killed, Bran wakes up and the episode ends.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting note talking about how we've mentioned that direwolves almost are tied somehow mentally to the animals. Bran's dog Summer stirs, or I think is whining on the bed, and then Bran wakes up. Like it can almost tell that something's happening or something's not right, or that Lady, Sansa's dog's in trouble or something's going on. Yeah.
All right. Moving along here still some more. We're going up to...
That's two of them.
That's 2 episodes down.
6 hours so far?
Only an hour and a half roughly here so far is taken up. Up to episode 3 now, titled Lord Snow. Basically starts off with Ned arriving at King's Landing and kind of being hurried to go into the small council meeting there shortly after they arrive. And the small council is basically made up of those people kind of being put in charge to kind of run the city and country there basically while Robert's off drinking and whoring himself to death there.
Like you
do. So, first though, is kind of that happens before Ned gets to the small council is you get the shot of the Iron Throne and Jaime Lannister sitting in the throne room there before Ned kind of walks through. You get to see the Iron Throne, which is kind of really interesting here. Point I would make to note is obviously I understood why they did it this way, but like the Iron Throne from the book version to the Iron Throne in the show version,
Yes.
2 completely different things there here. The show version is more of like they took so many swords and made a throne out of it, whereas the Iron Throne in the book is basically they took all of the swords from the defeated army and made this gigantic mountain of a structure that was used as the throne for the king of Westeros.
It is like a mountain. It's like 30 some feet high and like 20 steps, like a full flight of steps to walk up to it. It's meant to be very intimidating.
Yep.
When Aegon the Conqueror, the first Targaryen, came and landed in King's Landing, and bit by bit, the reason he's called the Conqueror is because he took over each of the different little mini kingdoms that were the 7 realms and united Westeros as one whole continent of a realm. Every time he defeated an army, he would send back to King's Landing all the collected swords that were usually melted from his dragon's breath back to King's Landing. And so nobody really knew what was going on until after he had conquered the 7 realms. People would go back to King's Landing to bend the knee and see what he's been doing, and he's made this gigantic throne. So it's not just, as you point out, it's not just that the swords are like 12 or 24 swords. It's the swords from entire multiple armies that have been melded together to make this monstrosity.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
So kind of with this Ned walking through the throne room, you get a little bit more of that backstory like we talked about earlier of Jaime the Kingslayer, how he kind of got his name of him and Ned are kind of talking about the end of the war or the rebellion there, basically, of how Jaime stabbed the king in the back there. But then...
family died. I put a question mark here as to up to this point... Has he ever been referred to as the Kingslayer? I think it's from this point on.
There's a point.
Kingslayer.
He might have been told that he was the one who killed the king, but I had it marked down when it actually did happen. There's a point later on when he's called into Robert's room to talk about war stories with Sir Barristan Selmy, and that's the first time you actually hear someone call him Kingslayer. Robert yells it, "Kingslayer, get in here!"
Okay.
Yeah. It is, however, the 4th time we hear someone say the phrase "winter is coming," as Jaime references to, he's talking to Ned in the throne room. He says, "What is it you Northerners always say when trouble is brewing? Winter is coming." And it's the 4th time we've heard it in this show. I think it's a phrase that we do hear quite a bit.
Definitely made its way into pop culture for sure.
Exactly.
So next is the introduction of the small council there, basically. So you meet Lord Varys. He is it the Master of Whisperers or?
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
I wasn't quite remembering his title very well. You meet Grand Maester Pycelle, and a maester in this world is kind of like the healing doctor, prescriber of medication and stuff like that for treating the ill and sick.
master of like all knowledge almost. They're the scholars, the ones.
Scholarly knowledge, yeah.
Totally, yeah. He's a like it's a league or a order. It's an order of scholars.
Correct. The maesters are, yeah.
Yeah.
The chains they wear, the more chains they have, the more knowledge they have. In the book, it talks about in Old Town, which is one of the areas, one of the towns in the realms here that we haven't gotten to yet in our book, so I'm not going to go into too much detail with it. But at the Citadel there, where kind of all knowledge in the world is housed, they learn something, and every time they learn something or are accredited that they've gained enough knowledge in it, they forge another link in their chain, which is why you keep seeing the Maesters or Maester Lewin up for the Starks and Winterfell. They're all wearing these heavy chains that they walk around with. It shows that the more they have, the more knowledgeable person they're supposed to be.
Yep. And then you meet Renly Baratheon, the youngest Baratheon. And I just looked this up too. We were right. Robert was the oldest. Then there was Stannis.
Yeah.
And then there's Renly Baratheon. I don't know if they kind of talk about what Renly Baratheon does on the small council.
Complains.
He's the master of ships.
I don't know. That is one of the titles that they have, but I don't know if that's him or not.
Yeah.
All he does is just kind of point out that there's a tournament to be had.
Littlefinger is the master of coin.
Yep.
That Littlefinger,
Peter Baelish, who isn't actually called Littlefinger until
at the tournament.
At the tournament, yeah, I think that's when he gets his name thrown out
by Arya.
Yep. All right. So then, kind of after the council meeting, there they have a shot of Cersei and Joffrey talking, which I think is like a really good point. That kind of a good conversation that kind of happens between these two characters, because you learn Cersei kind of and her motherly desire of kind of protecting her children, but while also though providing counsel to Joffrey, and then you kind of get to see a little bit more of that spoiled brat little twerp that kind of Joffrey is, who thinks that when he's king he has all this authority and nobody can tell him what to do, because they're having a conversation of like, I think of talking about who are their enemies and what would they do if the Starks rebelled against them or something like that.
Mm-hmm. It's a good mirror. So you go ahead, Gary.
It was a lot of showing that Joffrey doesn't really have any strategy for friendship, but also like the larger conversation of from the Queen and the Prince is a lot more about the beginning of the scene is about lies and propaganda. Because the Queen says like, well, this is the bite of the direwolf, and it's like, in the stories they sing, it's going to be told that you killed this direwolf, and he's like, why that didn't happen? Well, 50 years from now, you just make shit up, and it's that he's Bran the Builder, Aegon the Conqueror, like basically Cersei's telling her son that like you can make up whatever lies you want, like it's just the story. Like as long as it's the story of your legend and like you inevitably will be king, and that's I'm giving you is this like to be greater than thou, great figurehead. Anyway,
I like the comment that you'd made about the strategy of these rulers or the lack thereof. That it's very mirrored of what we were talking about earlier with what we see in Viserys over with the Dothraki. The people who are in the leadership roles or are primed to be the leaders of these two different factions are terrible leaders. They both show that they have no strategy and don't know how to work with people or even really how to manipulate people. Joffrey, for being the prince and heir apparent, is reckless and capricious and prone to violence.
Sons.
And then Robert, even being king, he's anything but. Just like Viserys is reckless and prone to just arguing with everybody. And so it's really interesting to see that it's the auxiliary characters that we keep hearing about, like Ned Stark or Cersei or Jaime Lannister even, or Catelyn Stark are the ones who are really the driving forces of what people should do or who can read the room so much better.
Well, you talked about Robert, and I think it like how did he was actually a natural lead. He's an alpha male, like how he was a leader. And it's just, as you said, like Joffrey and Viserys have no strategy towards like building a kingdom or ruling a kingdom, and neither did Robert. But what Robert had was he was just like the alpha male, and those two are alpha males. They're just people who are born into it. Anyway.
Exactly. Well, I think I don't know the quite phrase, but Cersei points it out to Joffrey. A good king knows how to rule and when to crush their enemies. It's not all about just being the strongest. It's about being the smartest and who can outwit what your opponents are doing.
Exactly.
Do you have anything to add? We can keep rolling.
Yeah. I'm just going to kind of keep moving along there. It kind of goes to Ned having a conversation with Arya because he finds Arya in her room practicing with that sword needle. And he talks about swords and kind of training.
5th time winter is coming.
It's a nice kind of conversation between a father and a daughter. They're kind of just showing the bond that they both have. Because I think Ned kind of empathizes with Arya just a little bit because he knows Arya is not going to be a lady like Sansa is. Arya is just more of the wilder. Not as wilder in the sense of like she's not going to conform to kind of the way everything is structured now.
She's gonna make her own path.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then we go back to Winterfell where Bran is laying in bed listening to old Nan kind of talk a little bit. I wanted to point out she mentions Sir Duncan the Tall, which is just kind of it's a knight that's talked about more in one of the other books of from George R.R. Martin called like the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, I think, or something like that. It's a couple of short stories that I really want to kind of look into, but it's about like a knight who kind of travels around going to these different tournaments and has these different adventures. You hear old Nan call Bran my sweet summer child, and then she kind of talks the story about the long night.
That's great.
The war between the White Walkers and humanity that happened way back when. Everybody believes it's a myth now because nobody was alive really that long. It's just now stories that are being passed down. So then the next part I talk about is it's kind of like a flash forward to Kat is just somehow all of a sudden in the Capitol building there, basically. Like she's all of a sudden there at King's Landing. I mean, obviously we take some more fact that some time has probably passed between, because I mean, it's weird when you think about it. Episode 3 starts with Ned being at King's Landing, which we learned it takes roughly a month for Robert to get to Winterfell, and now a month later they're back in King's Landing. But then also too, I'm sure Catelyn was able to move slightly faster because it was just her and somebody else. Yep. But she's kind of taken into the city by some guards to Littlefinger's brothel, there, Peter Baelish, and we find out that he was an old childhood friend of Catelyn. There, and you also learn he secretly has like kind of a crush on her still.
Hardcore crush.
Hardcore, yeah. He wants to do anything to help her out.
I think that Ned even mentions that later too when he's talking about to Kat about Peter Baelish. He says he still feels for you.
Yep, that comes up, I believe, in that's still this episode.
Maybe that might be
it's
the next one.
Yeah. Anyways, we move over. Oh, sorry, Gary.
Yeah.
Okay. We move back up to the wall there where Jon is fighting / training with his brothers, and you kind of see how much better of a swordsman Jon is than anybody else there at the wall. It also helps the fact that he was born and raised in a noble household there, so he had access to, and I think Tyrion even mentions this, like he had access to a great trainer, whereas these guys have never maybe picked up a sword before in their life.
Right.
And then you meet the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Sir Jeor Mormont, I think is how you say it.
Jeor Mormont, yep. Who actually we find out later is Jorah's dad, because he mentions his father, someone still of great renown.
Yep, exactly.
Great thing.
And then you find Tyrion has a conversation with Jon, kind of talking a little bit more about his fellow brothers of the Night's Watch to kind of maybe open Jon's eyes more to realize, hey, these people didn't have the kind of upbringing I did of like the fighting and stuff like that. So then Jon realizes that, you know, in order for the Night's Watch to be better, he needs to start helping kind of with training and stuff like that. So you kind of see he starts working a little bit more with those guys kind of in the episode of helping them kind of get better at what they're doing with their sword play there. And then I wrote down Littlefinger for some reason. And I don't know if this is like the first time we talk about it, because it's not the tournament, but
No, that happens at the tournament.
Can't remember why on earth I wrote that one down.
The dagger's owner is revealed, and that
Okay.
Is that at that point?
So the dagger is the owner of the dagger is revealed, because this is where Ned then basically is taken to the house where Cat is being hidden at there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it should be noted too, Ned is not trusting of Peter Baelish when he first sees him. He actually pins him against a wall and starts choking him in front of his own brothel, thinking that, you know, because Peter Baelish says that he has his wife here, and when he finds out he's at a brothel, you know, of course he suspects the worst, because Ned is all about tradition and, you know, what's the right honorable thing to do.
I think maybe too he's kind of thinking Peter Baelish is poking a little fun at him because the honorable Ned
his wife's
Stark,
honor.
Yeah.
Sure.
So then we have the conversation that we talked about earlier there, where Robert is sitting in his room there talking to Sir Barristan Selmy about their kills, their very first kills.
Gosh.
So that's kind of an interesting conversation there. You kind of learn a little bit more about like the fact that some of these, I wouldn't say haunting them, but they could still kind of like clearly remember who these kills were, their first ones they had there. And then Jaime
crushed a breastplate, and like, and the smart boys were at the edge of battle.
Yep. He talked because I think his first kill came basically at the start of the rebellion there, when he killed some Tully, like Gary had mentioned there, some stupid boy basically who came charging at him thinking he could end the whole rebellion in one swing. And Robert ended up crushing his breastplate there and killing the kid. Whereas then, like, all of these smarter people were hanging out towards the edge of the battles. They were trying not to get too involved. And then they talked to Jaime, too, about his first kill. So it's kind of... And then this is, I think, where you mentioned there, too, the first uttering of the word Kingslayer is mentioned in reference to Jaime.
Right. Also, one of those names that people just are kind of hear all the time. They go, oh, yeah, Jaime. But it's an extremely derogatory term, especially as he's standing there in King's Guard uniform, supposed to be the King's Guard, and he's calling him Kingslayer, that he's, you know, pointing fun at the fact that he, you know, reneged on the one thing he's supposed to do.
Also, I haven't noted that, like, it's alluded to quite greatly that Barristan Selmy is a very great swordsman.
Yes.
And it's like, and it's explained like as Jaime, who's already been like, you know, kind of explained in the story that like Jaime Lannister is a very good swordsman. It's to see that like Jaime Lannister is even like very impressed with Barristan Selmy. Like that was a flurry or whatever he called it. Like,
yeah, with a repose, he said, "Best move I ever saw." So Barristan Selmy, I do have to go off just for one quick second here and touch on Barristan Selmy. My note was that he is the freaking man. Like how you mentioned, he's not just like a great swordsman. He is like the revered swordsman in Westeros, the best swords person they probably have. When the Mad King, towards the end of his reign, was in his like full-on I'm in charge of everything and everyone else is out to get me phase, he actually, against everyone else's suggestion, went to a nearby town where they said, yeah, come over, we'll take care of you. And actually, this nearby town of Duskendale kidnapped the king and like struck him and said, you're not going to be the king anymore, you're crazy, you know, we should be king, or we need to get more money because we're also near Kingsport and you're taking all our finances. And Barristan Selmy, really abridged story, scaled the wall, snuck in under the cover of darkness, took out guards before they could alert to him to his presence, saved the king from his cell, escorted him back out over the wall and out the front door as everybody was realizing what was going on. Like, he is legend. He's not just like a great swordsman. Like, people say Barristan Selmy, and you're like, holy crap, the Barristan Selmy? And so, like, when you first see this show, obviously, I didn't have any idea who this character was supposed to be, but at this point in the show, they don't make great reference of it. They do later on talk about his great deeds, but just in that scene where you see them talking about war stories, like, he would have war stories you cannot top. Like, he's ended one of the Blackfire rebellions and saved the kingdom. He literally saved uh, King Eris before he like went full on craziness. He's the man when it comes to those who have great war stories.
We good to move forward after the first kill?
Yes.
Right.
So we have a scene of Jon basically going up to the top of the wall with his Uncle Benjen there to kind of talk about Jon thinking he's ready for everything, and Benjen's like, no, you're not. You're not ready to be a full-fledged member yet. But it's kind of, again, a nice scene. Like I said, I like all these scenes at the wall because it's kind of interesting to see what they set up around this area here. And then we cut to the Dothraki there. Jorah is sitting there talking about his father and talking about the honorable man he was. And I think he mention here where he kind of talks about how he betrayed his father's trust or something like that.
Yep.
Okay.
Selling slaves.
Yep. And then we come to find out that Dany Khaleesi is pregnant now with Khal Drogo's son or child or whatever it ends up being there.
Is that this part?
Yep.
We stopped the horde earlier,
and she walks off into the tall elephant grass and gets into a fight with her brother.
Yeah. I think a lot of my notes here towards the end, like I wasn't being as detailed specific because I didn't want to like completely recount the entire episode, but
sure. I just had down the word Khaleesi and then the greater than sign and king. That she's clearly becoming more important than her brother is.
Yep. And her brother's starting to feel kind of like he's being relegated to the side, and his goal of crossing the narrow sea to get to King's Landing is not going to happen.
Right.
So cut back to the wall there, and we get our introduction to Maester Aemon, the Grand Maester there with the Night's Watch there, who we learn more about him kind of as kind of the season progresses and everything with her up the wall. But he's such a great character to kind of sit there and listen to talk, and they're talking to Tyrion. Him and the Lord Commander are talking to Tyrion about the fact that Tyrion needs to do some work to try and help convince people to send more men to the Night's Watch because they are very understaffed there. Like they can't even man all the castles along the walls anymore.
Right. 6th winter's coming.
Yep. And then
in that conversation, I made it earlier about how this first couple episodes, they kind of give an explanation for like winter being as like what we consider winter is not how the seasons work in this world. Like winter is like there's kind of a winter and a summer, but it's like cyclical of like maybe summer will be 5 years, maybe it'll be 10 years, and maybe it'll be like, and how long the summers and winters are is a unknown capacity, and so that's kind of as you talk to all these maesters and old Nan's story about like how unpredictable like the winter is, and that like it kind of bedrocks why winter is coming is such a thing. Anyway, moving forward.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And then the final scene with the wall there is Tyrion fulfilling his great wish there of pissing off the edge of the world there, because you see him pissing off the top of the wall there, and then he has one final conversation with Jon Snow there. And then we finally cut back to King's Landing, where Arya has now begun her air quotes dancing instructions with what's his name? Syrio
Orel.
Sort of Bravos.
One of the former first Sword of Bravos there.
There's a whole chapter about the free cities and the places across the Narrow Sea, and Bravos is mentioned. And I don't know all the detail for it, but they do go into detail on the actual water dance and the great sword fighters in Bravos.
Yep.
So that's legit. You mentioned earlier Khaleesi's pregnancy, but that is right before that Bravo scene, and I just wanted to point out Jorah did seem to have a very specific response to that. Like the camera panned in on him, and he actually said, "I got to go right off to Qohor" or something like that. And so, just sort of out of the blue, he said, "I'll catch up to you." But it just struck me as weird that he would react so specifically.
That fiction of Casperia, I know it's at least in episode 5, but it Jorah disappears, and here's the start of it. Anyway, we did episode 3. Ready to jump to episode 4?
We are now heading into episode 4, Crippleds, Bastards, and Broken Things.
Yay, last one.
So we start off with our first introduction to Hodor, the gentle giant.
I just wrote that down, Hodor.
I actually made a note here, which is, I think the first 3 episodes have a scene before the credits. This episode, I think, is the first one where the episode starts with the credits.
Okay.
And when I watched the intro, Pentos is not on the map anymore, but it added Dothraki and Das. Yeah, it is a real motherfucker to try to read as it pans.
Yep.
Like, because you can't read most Dothrak or whatever it is, because it literally just pans past it.
Sideways.
There's a river somewhere between King's Landing and Winterfell. Like, I can see that there's words there. I have no idea what the fuck it says. There's like a river, a lake there.
Yep.
Again, yeah, it just helps with that solidifying of where we are and where people are at.
Yeah, Bran sees the 3-eyed raven, and then yes, I have next notice.
Right. There's actually a couple instances in those other episodes too where you see like a raven at the windowsill, and then when Bran wakes up, and there's these weird little things. It's like, what's with the raven? But then this is specifically where we see he's having dreams since his fall, or something's going on where he's having visions, and he sees up close. He follows this one. He's walking, right? And then as he walks up to it, we see it's a 3-eyed raven. So,
yeah,
interesting.
Hodor.
So then we're introduced to actually, we learn Theon Greyjoy's actual name here, because I think the first 3 episodes, he's shown a lot, and they talk to him, but they don't ever mention his name.
Right.
I think he doesn't talk at all in the second episode. In the first episode, he only talks during the direwolf scene.
Yep.
Like he talks in the Godswood just briefly when Catelyn, before she heads south, says, I think it's the Lannisters, and Robb says, I'll fight. And Theon says, I'll swear my sword to you as well. And Master Lewin, or maybe it's Sir Roderick, or like, are you going to start a fight in the Godswood? And they both kind of calm down. So yeah, so they do speak a little bit, but that's all that we hear from him. We really hear, as Tyler mentions here, his backstory a little bit when he's talking to Tyrion on his way back down.
And then Tyrion goes in and talks to Robb and talks about the horse saddle. Gets introduced a couple episodes later.
Yep, this is where Tyrion makes kind of that introduction about the horse saddle and everything. Shift back up to the wall there, and we get our introduction then to Samwell Tarly. This big guy there, basically, who gets sent to the wall, who is, upon first seeing him, you're like, wow, this guy is just not going to last long, it doesn't seem like, up there, because he's just he has no sword skills at all or whatever. He doesn't seem like much of a fighter in him whatsoever, so it's kind of just interesting to see this guy there. Then I wrote down, fuck Alistair Thorne, because God, that guy's an asshole. He's
that's the commanding teacher guy, not the Lord Commander. That's Georg Mormont. He's like the instructor guy who's Tyrion and Georg are talking about him, and he said, I didn't pay him to be good. I need him to train me an army type thing.
Yep.
Yeah, he's kind of a tool to Jon and the rest of the new recruits at the Watch.
Then we shift over to Varys in the tub with his lady friend there, talking about dragons and kind of like the history of the dragons and why they kind of died out there, because after so long they stopped becoming these large monsters and they ended up just becoming smaller and smaller creatures, to like where the last one was about the size of a dog.
Right.
In that scene, there's some weird foreshadowing that you only get if you've seen, is she talks about, I've seen things, a blade made of
Right.
dragon glass, a man who could change his face the way
Right.
other men change their clothes, and then interesting seeing lots of exposition on
Very interesting. Yeah.
and
Just kind of like some of the filling out more of like the broader world of like how there's all of this fantastical stuff that's still out there.
Exactly. Just these crazy things that apparently are possible in this world.
Then we got Sansa walking through the throne room with her. I don't know what to call
Nan.
that.
I think it's Nan. It's
not
it's
Nan.
not Nan. Nan's in. It's
Not-
her wet nurse or her something.
it's a septum.
Yep.
I saw the name in the Amazon whatever the hell, and it wasn't. It was just I just said septum.
Okay.
But yeah, they're talking about royal succession and children and how
Yeah.
she won't have a son and she'll be a disappointment. Like very teenage issue, because I think I said earlier she's like 13, so very like teenage failure issues. And then the scene kind of ends with her still being mad at her dad, is wanting to forgive him, and I assume it's back to his dad killing Lady.
Yep. The names that she mentions are all actual characters in that history line of the Targaryen kings, because the book goes into detail about all the different mistresses and all the marriages that worked out and those that didn't, and even some of the children who died young, or because of war or whatever have you. Some of the Targaryen kings died young, and then their children became successors who in their own right were still young and did well and lived long, prosperous lives, or didn't and died themselves young. And so some of those names that she mentions, Jane, I don't remember the name, but Jane something, only had 5 daughters for her husband. Those are named Jane Poole. Thank you. So that would be we may not be able to rattle off, not all of us, all the American presidents, but it's that history of well-known names that this history would know. It's only 300 years back, so there's some prominent names in there that when she's talking to her septum, it's well, what do I do if this happens? Like it happened to this person, and some of those stories did not end well, where the Targaryen kings were not happy that they didn't have a male heir.
Yeah.
So then we move on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Gary.
So moving on to the next scene where it's at the King's Council, and just talking about the city being a shitstorm, and you're introduced to the head of the city watch.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's ever. He becomes more prominent down the line, but it was just the realization that this is where he shows up, and he really is a background character, but he is more important later on.
Yeah, I don't know if his name's actually ever said there, or if I just didn't catch it there too. But then, towards the end of throughout the council meeting, Ned learns that the crown is so in debt to the Lannisters.
Million.
Yeah, it's $6 million gold into the Lannisters, which is kind of more about you learn more about the Lannisters doing what they can to kind of continue to control everything.
Well, $6 million would be a lot in this day and age. So back then, I'm imagining that's an astronomical number. It's are you kidding me? How does that much debt exist?
Yep. And then Ned kind of starts talking to Maester Pycelle there at the end of the small council meeting. He starts to kind of question, what happened to Jon Arryn, and kind of what happened during his final days. And the Maester kind of ends with Jon Arryn was sputtering words the seed is strong, kind of repeatedly over and over again. And Ned just kind of found that kind of interesting, and I wonder what he was talking about there. So then we go back to the wall there, and Sam meets up with Jon at the top of the wall there, basically where they're doing a lookout. And we learn that Sam has a very sad and tragic story, basically, for why he is there at the wall. To basically retell it here is Sam's father told him on his 18th birthday he will either renounce all claim and titles to the Tarly name and go serve his time up at the wall, or they will go out on a hunting party. His horse will neigh, he will fall and die out there, or as what his father then referred to him as, "This is what I will tell your mother happened to you."
Right.
Instituting that,
Ouch.
insinuating there basically that his father is going to kill him out there and leave him for dead or whatever.
Yeesh.
I was like, wow, that's terrible. So then cutting back to King's Landing, Ned is starting to kind of pick up his investigation a little bit more there. He gets a book from the Maester there about maybe I'm jumping ahead
History,
there.
the great houses.
Yeah.
Family lineages or something like that of the great houses of Westeros.
Yep.
And Ned and Littlefinger walking through the garden, and Littlefinger starts talking about the spies. And I guess as a world building experience, it's really just explaining that even the Queen has spies and
Varys.
has spies and Varys has spies, and so everyone information is just such a weapon in the capital.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then also too, through this book and kind of learning a little bit more about what happened to Jon Arryn there at the end of end of his life there, it leads Ned to kind of go to this foundry blacksmith area in the capital, kind of meet up with this blacksmith, and then kind of take a look at one of his apprentices there named Gendry, who then we later find out kind of a little bit after the fact that Ned thinks that Gendry is one of Robert Baratheon's bastard sons there because of just the character, the build of him, his black hair and everything like that, which he finds through that book of the great houses there. Black hair is kind of strong within the Baratheon family.
Gendry's mom had yellow hair.
Yep.
I had a question on that too.
I put that in there. And it's just, as I said, some of these early episodes, there's some buried one-line details that are super interesting on a rewatch.
So I had to go back really quick and look at part of that exchange where I'd mentioned earlier in an earlier episode where Cersei was talking about her child that passed away at a young age. And she says that they took the child away and Robert beat his fist red against the walls. He was so angry about it. Just to ask, do you think Gendry was that child? They said he died, but maybe he didn't. And they took him away at a young age because he would have stayed in King's Landing, as we found out. He just ended up down in the area. I don't think so. I just wanted to hear if you all thought that there might be some tie there, because he said his mother had blonde hair too.
No, I don't think that was it.
I don't think so.
It was just, look, we talked about same old Tarly here, and the Tarleys are a fish.
Nope.
And their was family duty.
That's two different families. There's the Tarly family, which is Samwell, and then there's the Tully, which Tully is Cat's family, Catelyn's family.
Yeah.
My brain is just mixed up like a motherfucker.
So we then jump back to the Dothraki people there, and Khaleesi beats the shit out of her brother, who tries to assault her basically in her own house there, because he's starting to get more and more paranoid, or kind of feels like he's getting pushed more and more to the side there, as Khaleesi kind of slowly gains her confidence of being a queen of the Dothraki people.
She's trying to honor him with gifts and invite him to eat with her, very much inviting him to be honored by her, to be in her presence, but he doesn't. He just wants to get the fuck out of there. He's just very much looking at the long term. Has no he just wants to get the army and get back to Westeros.
Something about Viserys that probably follows from his father. It just seems like there's some madness that maybe passed down to him as a child of his father. Just that as he becomes more and more reckless or more and more paranoid, it was the word you just used, it just manifests that, I lash out, or I'm unnecessarily aggressive at the end of whatever I think is coming. Interesting.
Then we cut back up to the wall there. Sam is talking with John there in their, they're in that kind of kitchen dining room area there.
Yeah, that was a good one too.
They're kind of conversing about have they ever done it basically with a woman before? They kind of talk, they kind of share that story there. Yep, and then you kind of learn why. This is where you kind of get that knowledge of why Jon Snow has the last name of Snow, because he was born and raised in the North there. This is where that information is dropped. And we already kind of covered that a little earlier in this discussion here, but this is kind of officially where this information gets kind of brought out of, like, bastards from the North are called Snow. And then I've got another note here of, again, fuck Alistair Thorne and his cold story there. He's trying to Go ahead, Gary.
So Sam says in the explanation of the girl that John was going to be with, Sam says, I like red hair, and it is foreshadowing to later on. Yes, Alistair Thorne is a fucking and
It was
and also, it was upon a rewatch that I realized he implies that there was cannibalism involved.
yeah.
Because if we had some of you fat boys, we would have ate well for a month.
Yep. Because he's trying to basically, like, scare them or kind of rattle them about, like, they're not true members of the Night's Watch because they haven't experienced this harsh situation there to survive out in the wilderness. It's like, fuck you, dude.
I think part of it is, like you said, he's trying to scare them, but I also think that, like, some of that stuff is shows the severity of what you're up against in the North.
Yes.
Like what Gary was mentioning earlier, the irregularities in the weather patterns. You could have winter that lasts for a whole year. And, you know, we're located up in the Midwest, so it gets pretty cold, but it's, you know, usually for about 4 months. It's, you know, at worst, maybe 5 months where it's particularly cold. But a year of, like, bitter cold. And again, we're in homes, right? Like, they talk about when you're a ranger, like Benjen is, or like Alistair is, you go north of the wall. You're out in the open. You know, he makes reference to you got to make your own fire or find food, or if food is scarce, you know, how do you survive out in the open with no food? And that's what he was talking about, having to resort to cannibalism. So yes, I think it is a scare tactic for what he sees as two greenhorns, but at the same time, it's this weird foreshadowing about when they say winter is coming. They're talking about hard times.
Nick, maybe you have the book of knowledge and information. In the Night's Watch, both of those two come from not royal, but they're great houses. They both are, as they went to the Night's Watch, not for a crime. Can they walk away?
No, the Night's Watch is forever. Actually, I don't want to take up time. I know that we're really, really long. What's
so
this?
When Alistair was trying to scare, when you guys said scare them, I was like, I wonder if he scared them enough, if they leave before they take their vows.
So they couldn't they? Like, you could leave before you took your vows because you're still not officially a member of the Night's Watch at that point in time.
That's true. You don't take your vows until you become a ranger. So maybe he could scare them away.
So I mean, like, John could, if I understand, kind of, I think what you're trying to say there, Gary. Like, John could leave because he's up there technically, like, voluntarily. Other people, like, were sentenced up there. It was either go up there or, like, have your hand cut off or be castrated or something like that.
Or like Sam, you know, your parents will kill you.
Yeah, Sam is in the same kind of situation. I kind of equate to those other guys who were sentenced in the Night's Watch. Of, like, if Sam leaves, his father will find him and kill him, basically, because Sam is the firstborn of the Tarly household.
He's not a criminal. That's what I was saying. Yeah. Like, in that world, like, they still could leave. Sam would never go back to his family or his, like, whatever, but they both could leave. So maybe that's why I'm trying to scare them away. Like,
maybe they could before while they're still training. Once they take their oaths, it's there for life.
Yes, that's when it would become for life, pretty much. So then, kind of continuing on with the episode here, we jump back down to King's Landing, where we are at the tournament for the hand, pretty much, that Ned does not want to happen because it's costing the crown money.
He doesn't even show.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. He doesn't even show for the first part there. But then you have Sansa getting her first introduction / meeting with Littlefinger, Peter Baelish, and I think this is where the name finally comes up that he's called Littlefinger.
Mhm.
Is that a bullshit, Nick, about the fingers?
Yes. That portion of the Vale, which is north of the Crown Lands, north of King's Landing, that particular area just south of the neck and the north to the east of the Riverlands is called the Fingers, because that area of the Vale is very rocky and it has a couple outcropping peninsulas that look like elongated fingers. And
The reason he's called Littlefinger, or is there something else?
well, he makes a reference, he mentions to them, it's a very clever nickname in the sense that he was very small statured growing up, so he was Little Finger.
Yep.
And
And
the next time I have is that the Mountain is introduced, or one of the 4 actors that play the Mountain.
yeah, so unfortunately, you do notice a couple of recasts throughout the show here. So there's a
Right.
guy who plays the Mountain, Sir Gregor Clegane. He is the older brother of Sandor
Yes.
Clegane there,
Yep.
which is he is a very tall, very strong, very scary guy in this world here.
Right.
And they begin the jousting tournament, which he goes up against the knight who was originally serving under Jon Arryn, who shortly
Yes.
after Jon Arryn died,
Sir Hugh.
he was promoted to a knight, and then he is killed during the first round of this jousting tournament by a lance from the Mountain basically being lodged in his throat.
Very gruesome, very graphic.
Yes.
Is that intentional? I was just looking at the armor because they talked about, like, as I'm rewatching it, like they talked about he just got new. Maybe that's later on. I talked about just new armor, but I noticed his armor was not. I don't think it was designed for jousting.
He does have the open face mask, like towards the like. It seems like his armor kind of stops like at the lower part of his neck, and then he's got the open face mask too in his
I
helmet.
think most jousting armor, and maybe this is just historically correct, has like a neck, like a neck guard here that like has something that like allows you not to guard your fucking neck.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
Yeah, it's a good thought there, Gary. It's definitely a point we might have to pay attention to the next couple episodes to see, like, was this intentionally set up this way so the Mountain would kill this poor guy? But then kind
That's very
of
interesting.
kind of going through this here too, Littlefinger leads over to talk to Sansa a little bit more quietly, and Sansa looks back to see Sandor Clegane standing back there. Sandor Clegane has kind of half of a burnt face basically there, and then Peter Baelish tells the story of how that he got that burn. Basically, he was playing with his brother's toys at one point in time, and his brother at this point in time was already a big, strong child, and his brother was upset by this, and instead of saying or anything about it, he basically grabs his younger brother by the back of the neck and pushes his face down into the fire that basically burned the one side of his face.
Right. Yeesh.
Then jumping over, Ned and Cersei have a conversation. I don't have much details about what that one was about.
I think it's about just there. Like it sounds like it's trying to mend some fences, like trying to. Oh, the queen wanted to apologize for the messiness in of the killing of Lady, and she said something about like I get protective when it's about my family, and so it's just trying to iron out that like just there's some tension between these two characters and they both don't like each other.
Again, it's kind of that animosity with a smile, because they end that conversation where I had made an earlier reference. She's talking about he's just a soldier, he just carries orders, and he says that he's very good at destroying his enemies when he needs to. And she smiles and says, "So do I," and she leaves. And so, yeah, they're very non-veiled threats that they're both willing to go toe to toe if something comes up.
And then the final scene ends there basically with Catelyn and Sir Roderick checking into kind of this inn along their travels as they're trying to head back north there. And all of a sudden, Tyrion Lannister just happens to enter the same inn here. And it
they're
kind of
going north as he comes south. Yeah.
Yep, and then it basically ends with because Catelyn has become convinced then that basically Tyrion was the one responsible for trying to send the assassin to kill Bran there. And it basically ends with Catelyn basically rallying all of these people within the bar here to kind of stand up with her to help arrest Tyrion basically and try and bring him to justice for what she thinks is the alleged attempted murder on her son's life.
Right. And he seems very taken aback when she lays out these things. Like he doesn't seem to know what she's talking about. He seemed at least like he was pretending to, like he didn't know what was going on. So interesting to see how that plays out.
Why this was important, because he didn't even know that he was going to get accused of murder. Also, I have down here the non-named introduction of Bronn as the person who Tyrion like offers a copper to like take somebody's room. Like Bronn was like, yeah, sure, and he throws him a coin, and like Bronn, who becomes a more figurative character later on, is introduced.
I think like the next episode, he actually gets his name and stuff introduced there now, but it's again, we'll get to that part kind of as we kind of keep going.
Which is what happens a lot in Game of Thrones.
Yep. There are definitely like characters you kind of see a lot of times, like throughout different points of the show, who then kind of keep making appearances later on as we kind of keep going there.
We mentioned just briefly on that note, Samuel Tarly, who's up there with Jon now in the Night's Watch. Honestly, in this rewatch, I was shocked to see he already made his introduction. I did not remember him coming into this story as early as he did. I mean, I love Sam, so it's interesting to see his character again. But it was surprising to me that he came in so early. Episode 2, right?
Speaking of background characters introduced in the 3rd episode and like 4th.
Sam was just introduced in this 4th episode here, and
so does
like Hodor too,
who has more story later on, but it's just like seems like a random story beat for Jon in this episode. Like, anyway, I also pointed out like when Kat houses, she names off houses, and one of it is the Twin Towers of Frey, and that the Lord plans on taking another wife on his X numbered name day, and it's just like, oh, well, introductions to the phrase at least in name, and they come along later on.
Yep.
Before we end this arc, whenever we get a point here, if we get a chance, I wanted to just read off the Night's Watch vows. Sure. They keep talking about when you're a sworn brotherhood, or what the vows are.
I would actually say hold off on that, because that will be coming.
More when Jon actually does the vows.
Yep.
If he does, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Because there's just a couple different lines about when you're a sworn brotherhood, or like even here we've talked about once he makes his vows, and just so that people know what those are, and we hear the gravity in those words about what the length of servitude is, or what's required of you when you're a sworn brotherhood, because they talk about celibacy in that episode with Sam and Jon in the dining hall. Yep. It's interesting to hear that
in the conversation about bastards and girls.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll cover that. We'll kind of go over that just to be more clear and kind of explain it a little bit more detail when we get to that part.
Fair enough.
We already hit 2.5 hours.
We're at 2 hours and 19 minutes, 2 hours, 20 minutes here, basically. Yeah. So, yeah,
good stuff.
This is, I've kind of figured these first few episodes will be just kind of heavy discussion here, because there's just so much detail to kind of go through it, especially with like a lot of even first seasons of most shows too. It's just introducing characters, introducing places, introducing locations. It's just introducing a lot of history of like, why are some of these people here and everything like that. So I kind of figured these first few ones would be going kind of long, but yeah, definitely a lot of stuff and ground covered here. So kind of, I guess, to wrap this up here, any kind of final thoughts from you, Gary, to cover?
Yeah, just as I was trying to take notes on these, I was just like trying to keep notes of like what scenes we're in and trying to keep but yeah, just a lot of like things that are interesting on a rewatch, but a lot of the general plot is just like if you already know who these people are, it seems like you're just rehashing a lot of exposition.
Yeah, this
Yeah,
is
so it'll get
definitely
easier.
a show of
Yeah.
people sitting around talking for a lot of it too. Nick,
I was gonna say well, first of all, I have a thank you for hosting us and trying to keep us on track, even though Gary and I are trying desperately to pull you off track. My question for you, Tyler, as hostmaster, is are these the type of questions and some of the points that you like to hear us talk about? Was there anything that we can do more of or less of, just to try and keep us on track for next time?
no, I think everything was perfectly fine here this time. It's kind of a delicate balance we're trying to walk here with this because these episodes will be filled with a lot of people who have already seen the show, but we're trying to tiptoe around kind of spoiling anything for, obviously larger picture. Other people besides Josh might listen to this, and Josh is the one person in this group who hasn't seen the entire show, so he doesn't know how this ends. So it's kind of, we're trying to make sure we walk that fine line of like discussing the show in detail and everything like that, but we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because I want to preserve the surprise and everything like that for like what this show becomes and everything for other people who might stumble across this for the first time. So
There's a couple in it, like Perd, who was mentioned in the previous our introduction podcast. Perd mentioned he will probably try and watch this with his significant other, and she hasn't seen it. If she's watching these videos alongside us, I know Gary, you've mentioned your significant other as well, so it might be new to her.
No, she's watched it.
Okay,
We watched it together and then we rewatched it with her cousin. So I
there you
think
go.
my wife, I watched it like 3 times. Well, 3 times up to the point where the seasons were caught up, and then my wife, I think, has watched it through twice.
Gotcha.
And then the later seasons, there wasn't a lot of rewatching because it was all fresh and new. And then when we restarted from the beginning. So yeah, first season, this is probably like watch through number 5 or 6 because I start a rewatch and then I just kind of falls off.
anything else kind of to touch on for you, Nick, there for this?
No, this is fun. Thanks for hosting us tonight.
Yeah,
Sorry we got long-winded, but it was good stuff.
perfectly fine for me. All right, well, that is going to do it here for the Got Rewatch podcast. Thank you if you are still listening after about 2.5 hours of us crazy idiots sitting here talking about this. Hopefully next time we maybe have a few more people who have caught up here, or we don't have internet issues with random stuff happening. It's always unfortunate we have technology fighting us every step of the way to try and get together and chat with friends. So
Right.
thank you everybody for listening. Sorry, what, Gary?
You can just end it.
Okay.
I'll ask you.
Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you all have a good one. I should probably mention here too, 2 weeks from now, roughly ish, we'll be doing 4 more episodes. I'm going to quickly pull that up here of what 4 episodes. So it's going to be episode 4, 5, 6, 4,
5, 6.
Oh yeah, sorry, 5, 6, 7, and 8 there. I'm just quickly pulling them up here. Sorry. Yeah.
I know. Tyler's going to do the final sign off, but again, yeah, just thanks everyone for listening. Appreciate it.
All right. Episode 5 is The Wolf and the Lion. Episode 6 is A Golden Crown. Episode 7 is You Win or You Die. And then episode 8 is The Pointy End. So 4 more episodes to cover in the next 2 weeks here.
Interesting if you've seen the show, like the episodes are kind of named based on what's going on. Anyway.
As most TV
Exactly.
shows do, yeah, they do definitely kind of talk a little bit about what's going on in the episodes, or like it's something that is kind of mentioned within the episode there too. So yeah, definitely good point. But yep. All right, so thank you again, everybody, for listening. Have a great one.
And you're not recording video, correct?
We're not recording video, no.
Okay, good.
That's you don't want to see
Free
everybody.
balling.
You don't want to see everybody see your drinking habit.
Free balling.
What, Gary?
Get butters. Just know if you're recording.
I am recording now. Yes, but like the
Fight your urge to say terrible things.
yes.
I'm broken on the inside.
Yeah. Too.
Anyway.
So I mean, I am recording now, but I will cut all of this stuff out when I do the big upload too. But swearing is fine.
All of it?
Well, maybe we'll find something to add at the end here. Swearing and stuff is fine. It's just, please, Gary, limit the amount of terribleness that comes out of your mouth to like high PG-13, low R rating.
Swearing is fine, but the one disclaimer, Gary.
What is the name
Say whatever you want,
hand?
except for
Whiskey.
Scotch.
Got it. Anyway, move forward. Tyler.
Scotch.
Yeah. All right. All right. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.